Donald Trump is headed back to the White House, and already it appears it won't be business as usual for U.S. foreign policy. What will America first mean for the world? Some hope Donald Trump will succeed where his predecessor failed to find lasting peace in Ukraine and the Middle East. But Trump's latest comments about annexing Greenland and Canada have cast doubt on the United States' reliability as an ally. What's behind Trump's apparent expansionist ambitions? Today, we'll look at whether foreign policy under Trump could mean a new era of land grabs by the most powerful. Hello and welcome to The Point. I'm Claire Richardson in Berlin, and I'm thrilled to introduce our panel today. We have Thorsten, the co-founder and director of the Global Public Policy Institute in Berlin. Moritz Gathmann, foreign correspondent for the German weekly magazine Stern. And American journalist Melinda Crane. You probably know her as a regular face here on To The Point. Warm welcome to you all. Thorsten, let's get started with you. Is a Trump presidency potentially a turning point in the way we see the United States on the world stage?
I think it is. And I think now we can be sure that this vision as the U.S., as the self-appointed guardian of the global liberal international order, that's over. Marco Rubio said as much in his confirmation hearing in the Senate yesterday. And we're in for a wild ride with America first. And as Europeans, I think we need to get our priorities straight. I don't think it's the expansionism, annexing Greenland and Canada that should be top of our mind. I think it should be top of our mind to make sure we don't get, or that Ukraine and Europe doesn't get thrown under the bus in a deal with Putin, and that we find some sort of common ground on trade and economics so that we don't end up in a tariff war with the U.S.
And Moritz, how do you think those wishes fit into what Trump actually has planned? Is it going to be about Greenland and Canada, or might he address some of the things that Thorsten pointed out?
I think for Trump, the priority is what's good for America, what are low-hanging fruits. I think the biggest danger is that in certain problems like Ukraine, he will see that it is difficult to solve. He will get bored and turn away. That is, I think, the biggest danger in the upcoming presidency.
And Melinda, this is, of course, not the first time that Donald Trump is president of the United States. Are there any clues that we could take from his first presidency as to what we might expect over the next 4 years?
Lots of clues. Thorsten said, get ready for a wild ride. So turbulence, volatility, definitely likely. That's because Trump, he has sort of a short-term attention focus. He'll look at one particular topic and he'll jump in big. He'll have summits, and then he turns away and does something else. So that's one point. Another one is transactionality. He is, his unique selling point, the Trump brand, is deal-making. He sees himself as a deal-maker, and we don't have to look back to the first term. We can look at what happened yesterday with the Middle East deal. He was the one who announced it first. He said, this is all my doing. This deal only happened, this epic deal only happened because of the pressure that I put, and it's just going to be the lead-in to many more wonderful things. But he's also a deal breaker. Remember that in his first term, he took the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement, out of the Iran agreement that had kept the lid on Iran's nuclear ambitions. He basically looked for what is to America's interest in his view. Those two treaties, I feel, were in the U.S. interest, but he took the U.S. out of them because that's not where he wanted to go. So expect deal-making and deal-breaking.
Yeah, and those really were seismic changes in U.S. foreign policy. Now, it's worth saying that most Americans who did vote for Trump, they were looking at domestic issues as the biggest factors in their decisions. But the rest of the world is going to be watching his foreign policy with great interest. And in that regard, Donald Trump has already caused a stir.
There is no overlooking this guest. Don Jr., Donald Trump's eldest son, recently made what he called a personal trip to Greenland. Once a Danish colony, Greenland is now a self-governing territory of Denmark. The island is strategically important and rich in natural resources. Could it soon be American territory? This is exactly what the president-elect announced during his son's visit.
Thank you very much. People really don't even know if Denmark has any legal right to it. But if they do, they should give it up because we need it for national security. That's for the free world.
When asked, Trump didn't completely rule out the use of military force to achieve his geopolitical goals. He has also expressed a desire to bring the economically and strategically important Panama Canal back under American authority. And he wants to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. But that's not all. His dreams of expansion extend even further. Trump announced his intention for Canada to become the 51st state of the United States.
Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, and you take a look at what that looks like, and it would also be much better for national security.
The plans have sparked international outrage. How unpredictable will Donald Trump's second term be?
So let's try to answer that question with a bit more depth now. Melinda, you've heard just there, Canada and Greenland in the new U.S. president, or the soon-to-be U.S. president's sights. How realistic or plausible is it that he'll actually make good on these threats?
You know, Trump is all about bluster and bravado, and it's actually a dilemma for us in the media because we give him so much attention for his outrageous claims that he makes. And that was a press conference. You know, he's just throwing some ideas out there and seeing what happens. And that's a trademark for him as well. Because he sees himself as a deal maker, he thinks, well, you know, I'll just put in my maximal claim and see if I get better terms for some stuff. He sometimes, some observers say he's operating according to the madman theory of international politics, which is what Richard Nixon liked to do. But Nixon was a very theoretical, strategic person. Trump, he operates on the basis of instinct. This is just who he is. So what does he want? Maybe he wants nice deals with Greenland on critical minerals, because that is going to be crucial as green energy ramps up. Maybe he'd like to pay less for the base that the U.S. has on Greenland. Maybe he'd like to get Canada to pay more for joint defense. Maybe he'd like to get Canada to do more to stop immigration or stop the flow of fentanyl from China. And maybe he'd like Panama to give U.S. carriers cheaper rates. Actually, is he going to use military force to do any of those things? I would pretty much lay my hand in fire that he will not do that. But it's part of his deal making. And one thing we can learn from this, he's not only transactional, it's all about power. These are allies, neighbors of the U.S. that he is putting under heavy pressure, just the way he would rivals. So he makes no distinction between the two because he doesn't really set much store by treaties and such. He wants power politics, and he's taking us back to the 19th century and the Monroe Doctrine of sphere of influence. This is the U.S. sphere of influence in North and South America, and they are going to decide what happens there.
Thorsten, tell us a little bit more, though, about Trump's interest in Greenland. Even if he is, as Melinda says, just throwing something against the wall, seeing if it sticks, it's not the first time he's expressed interest in the world's biggest island, is it? What do you think is behind it?
Well, I'm not in Trump's mind. What animates him, whether he just wants to get a good deal and go into history as the president that further increased the U.S. territory, I don't know. But what I do know is there are real strategic issues in the Arctic. And as Europeans, first of all, we should ask Greenlanders what they want to do. After all, Denmark colonized it. We should, if they want to exercise their right to self-determination, they should do so. And as Europeans, I think we have every interest in good cooperation with the United States on Arctic security. After all, Russia and China have quite a bit of mischief in store there. And so it's not for no reason that the U.S. strategic community worries about Greenland. They don't necessarily want to annex it, but they want to make sure that U.S. security gets a fair hearing there.
And just I'm curious, do we know how people from Greenland think about this? As you've said, their history as part of the Kingdom of Denmark has been a fraught one at times, and the current
government... I haven't
asked
them, but...
does want eventual independence.
But I think we don't do enough justice to what actually Greenlanders want and what the history is, and also the very checkered history of Denmark, their forced sterilization and all that. It's not an easy history, and I think they've been promised self-determination. They want to exercise this, and maybe they should just bargain for the best deal with, they can get. But for sure, I think it's of course right to rule out force and go against that. But I do think what Trump does with Putin will be of much more consequence than whatever his dreamings about Denmark, about Greenland and Canada are.
I do want to come back to that in just a moment. But yeah, Moritz, perhaps your thoughts on what's just been said.
I mean, one of the biggest dangers, of course, is that the perception of the U.S. itself will change dramatically after Trump will become president next week, because it will be quite hard to tell the difference between someone like Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump and the behavior of these powers if Trump is behaving like a bully. Then the US is no more benign hegemon and no more policeman of the world, of the rule-based world order, but it will behave like a bully. And that will, I think, harm the perception of the US, and it will make the whole world much more volatile.
Well, that's really the question, right? Why go this route if this is going to embolden strongmen like Xi, like Putin?
But that's how Trump sees the world.
Yeah.
He admires Trump. He admires Putin because he sees Trump too. But he sees Putin like a strongman. He likes these guys who do deals and.
He's also had nice things to say about Xi Jinping, and he did ask in the past, and he did ask him to attend his inauguration. He has a huge admiration for strongmen, and he said not too long ago that, Vladimir Putin, I kind of understand the guy. NATO was right at his doorstep. So this sphere of interest thinking is exactly what Vladimir Putin subscribes to when he wants to take Ukraine. And that is not alien thinking for Donald Trump. Therefore, when we look to what he's likely to do in a potential Ukraine-Russian deal, we will not see him taking into consideration the principle that is most important for Europeans, namely the rule of law. The fact that the UN Charter forbids a military attack on another country, and
territorial integrity.
Putin ran roughshod over that article of the UN Charter, and Trump, he won't have much interest in that. He will not attempt to extract any kind of cost to Putin for essentially undermining the international rules-based order.
Yeah, and Thorsten, do you agree? This seems like a huge departure from what the United States in the 20th and 21st centuries said was its priority, things like standing up for small countries' sovereignty.
Well, some countries would also disagree if you
lots of examples.
Iraqis and so on. But let's not get into...
The operative word was said.
Exactly. The operative word is
Let's not get
claimed.
into that. I think it's important that Trump actually it's a departure from this role. I mean, for us as Europeans, it's important to note that the certainty that the US will always be there for us and guarantee for our security, that's over. We're in the middle of a war on European soil. That should be our focus right now. What is our reaction to that? And that means we can be certain now we need to provide for our own security much more effectively as Europeans. We need to stand on our own feet. Also, if there's a deal on Ukraine, then we need to kind of be willing to pay for it and also, if necessary, cooperate militarily on this. And that should be top of mind, and also to avoid this trade war, what I talked about before. and Greenland and all that will come, and we can deal with it. But Ukraine, Putin, and also dealing with this alliance of China and Russia underwriting this expansionism of Putin, that should be top of mind.
I would like to add one point,
Please
because
do.
I think that's the real shift for the Europeans. Until this last election, Europeans thought that Trump was just an accident. An accident of history, and then Biden came back, and then we
So
will
did
come
many,
back to the
yeah.
transatlantic partnership, and it will be like the
And you're saying
60
that
years
ship
before.
has sailed
Yes, of course. I mean, the Americans elected Trump.
a second time.
It means that...
I think most Democrats thought the same. I think they thought that the first Trump term was an anomaly, and now we're heading back to the charted water that we knew from the past. And I think that's why there is so much shock in the U.S., because this does seem to reinforce the idea that the old idea many, at least East and West Coast Americans, meaning Democrats, had of their country is really now in question. And what Trump will do in this second term will take the U.S. much further down the path than his first term did, not least because if we look at his cabinet, back then, he had the generals who were mainstream thinkers, who stood in many ways for that old order where the U.S., the transatlantic alliance, is the strongest guidepost for American foreign policy. That won't be the case anymore. Trump has already undermined the credibility of the Article 5 collective security guarantee. He's already done it simply by calling it into question. So this second term will take us into new waters.
And let's dig in a little bit more into exactly what the ramifications of that are going to be. When you've got Trump making threats of violence, even against the United States' closest allies, what does that mean for Europe and for NATO?
Donald Trump and Europe always had a rocky relationship. The EU and NATO have been a secondary concern for him. He has repeatedly threatened NATO member states, demanding they allocate 3% GDP for military spending if they want America to defend them. Now, Trump is upping the ante again.
Well, I think NATO should have 5%, yeah.
His words are dividing NATO. Many member countries believe that even 3% is unrealistic. Others have agreed to Trump's demands. Then there is Trump's promise to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. How? Specific plans remain unclear, as is the future of US weapon supplies to Ukraine. Trump maintains strong relationships with several right-wing European politicians. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni recently visited him, and he has close ties with Viktor Orban, a key figure in European obstructionism. Elon Musk, his head of government efficiency, has recently interfered in German politics. He hosted a live chat on his social media platform X with Alice Weidel, the chancellor candidate for the far-right AfD party, and he endorsed her in the upcoming elections. These developments raise questions about the future of transatlantic relations.
So let's pick up on the issue of defense spending, which has long been a point of contention, right? We just heard Trump says he's increased how much he thinks NATO allies should be spending from that 2% of GDP now up to 5%. Do you think there's something behind that specific number?
Well, it's probably he thought I throw in 5%, maybe I get 3.5%. And the sad truth is we will be spending more for our defense under Trump than we would under President Harris, because we're more fearful that the US won't be there. The more fearful we are more serious about investing in our own capabilities. I wouldn't necessarily say it's just a numbers game, but what do we want to spend this for, and do we have a plan? And I think the plan should be, within the next 10 years, Europeans should be able to provide for these critical enablers within NATO on European soil that the US is actually providing right now. And that will take a lot of energy. It will take a lot more efficiency also in defense cooperation in Europe. We should invest in that. You know, how much it will cost, we will then see, I think. And if we're facing a war between NATO and Russia, we'll spend more anyway. And but we need to get serious about our own defense efforts. That will cost a lot of money, and we need to get our populations behind this so that, for example, the German population thinks the burden is fairly shared within the population for that extra spending.
That there's a sense of fairness about it.
Basically, if you look at the Trump presidency from a positive, optimistic point of view, it can be a push for the Europeans to finally realize European sovereignty. So let's see if we
there's a term for this effect that you actually move further under pressure from Trump than you would have otherwise, and it seems to be anticipatory compliance.
Anticipatory compliance.
There's a German term too, but I won't. But you basically try to. You're worried he's going to make things even tougher for you, so you go a little bit further toward his place, his position than you would otherwise.
That's really interesting. And we've been talking about all these ways in which we might see a kind of new American expansionism over the next 4 years. But there's also some factors indicating that it could go the other direction, right? That we could see a Trump administration that's increasingly isolationist. I'm thinking specifically of Ukraine. Do we have an idea, Moritz, of what is actually ahead for Ukraine under the Trump administration?
We have an idea because we have Keith Kellogg, who is his envoy for Ukraine and Russia. Former general, as far as I know. And he has laid out a strategy for Ukraine, like last year, which means basically that the conflict will be frozen along the front line, that de jure these territories will not belong to Russia, the territories that Russia occupies, but de facto they will be controlled by Russia. It will mean that peace controlling force will be stationed along the contact line. And but it also will also mean that we don't give up Ukraine to Russia. It will mean that we will have to invest in Ukraine to make it a so-called porcupine. So it will be militarily equipped enough to keep Russia out and to keep Russia from attacking once again.
I'm curious your thoughts, because from what he said, do you think that Trump could appear weak if he's seen to be giving some of what Putin wants to him?
I mean, the sad truth is, or the truth is, we don't have an idea, because we have an idea what Keith Kellogg thinks, but what Trump thinks on any given moment of a day that might also change, whoever he talked to last, we just don't have an idea how it's going. We can only hope that he doesn't want to appear weak as the president who sold out Ukraine, who caved into Putin. I mean, Trump admires strongmen, but he doesn't want to look weak among other strongmen either. So the appeal could be to Trump saying, telling him Putin actually failed with his effort, and you can make him actually look like a failure. Don't make him a success by throwing Ukraine under the bus and throwing Europeans under the bus. But that's only a hope. We just don't know. Trump has a lot of freedom to decide which way this goes. So we as Europeans, we can only signal we want to invest in Ukraine's security, in our own security, and we're serious about that.
Melinda, I'm curious about your thoughts here too, and also with the timeline. Trump kind of famously originally said he'd end the war in Ukraine in a day. That now
I think Trump is very, very focused on headlines. He wants to generate a headline, just like he wanted to generate a headline for the Middle East. It's also partly about domestic political consumption. But I think, will Trump undermine the international order that has sought to prevent attacks like Russia's on Ukraine? Yes, he will. I think there's no question that he will probably sell Ukraine short in ways that many of us feel would not be conducive to reinforcing that prohibition on the use of force. But one other thing about isolationism, and that's trade policy, and we won't have time to discuss that, but there is, for me, no question that Trump's planned tariffs against countries, emerging economies, against Europe potentially, against our neighbors, Canada and Mexico. This will lead to a great deal more skepticism about the U.S. It will lead allies to look for other coalitions of interest to try to balance out the U.S., and that will definitely undermine the United States, even in areas like the preeminence of the dollar. You may see trade patterns developing that try to circumvent the use of dollars.
And Moritz, just very quickly before we go, I'll give you the final word. Trump the isolationist or the expansionist? What do you think we're going to get?
Trump, the guy who puts American interests first.
That's what he's promising. America first.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much to our entire panel for joining us for this really insightful discussion. We've had Thorsten, Moritz Gathmann, and Melinda Crane with me in the studio. I'm Claire Richardson. You've been watching To The Point. Thank you so much for joining us.